Hi learners, welcome to the NPTEL course Strategy and Technology, a Practical Primer. We are in week 2 with the topic of strategy formulation. In this lecture, which is the 8th in the series, we discuss global strategy. Globalization has been an imperative for companies in the contemporary times. However, ever since industrialization, trade across borders and later on trade in industrial products across the borders has been the bedrock of growth for companies. Developed world companies in particular traded between the developed countries and also used their technological capabilities to provide products and enter emerging markets. That has been the growth of globalization from the developed world to the emerging world. However, as industrialization took root in emerging countries as well, companies tried to start the globalization primarily through exports. Then they became international operations, and some companies from the emerging markets have achieved truly international status. But what is the driver for global strategy? Generally, it is assumed that the closer a country is to another country, there would be better trade. Similarly, it is hypothesized that trade should be carried out between a country which can offer products and to a country which has markets. Generally, the economic status of a particular nation is the prime driver for a country to look at export prospects with that country. However, export strategy, or in contemporary terms, a global strategy, is far more complex and far more involved. Professor Pankaj Ghemawat has proposed a framework for understanding globalization. He proposed that distance mattered in international trade and proposed a new framework of cultural, administrative, geographic, and economic distance as an influencer of trade. He wrote an article, Distance Still Matters, in Harvard Business Review, which became a landmark article and evolved into the book on Cage Framework by Professor Pankaj. Here, distance doesn't mean physical geographic distance alone. It means distance on the other three dimensions of cultural proximity, administrative proximity, and economic proximity. Traditionally, economists stated that a positive correlation between the economic size and trade existed, and a negative correlation per contra existed between distance and trade. That is, the farther a country is from an exporting nation, the more difficult it is to trade with that nation. However, with globalization, countries were seen to be shrunk in distance, with rules of international trade being rewritten. Professor Pankaj Ghemawat proposed that distance still mattered, though the parameters needed to be seen in a quite different fashion. Professor Pankaj Ghemawat proposes that the classic country portfolio analysis needs to be substituted by a more realistic and practical cage framework to understand why and how international trade would take place. There is a paper by Jeffrey Frankel and Andrew Ross which talked about the effects of currency unions on growth. It was published in May 2000. According to that article, the distance attribute has an impact in terms of change in the international trade. However, certain distance attributes impacted international trade far more than certain other attributes. For example, the income level, that is GDP per capita. If there has been a 1% increase, the change in the international trade was 0.7%. If the size of the economy, that is the size of the GDP, extended by 1%, the international trade increased by 0.8%. If physical distance increased by 1%, the change in the international trade actually reduced by 1.1%. If the size of the nation increased by 1%, the international trade reduced by minus 0.2%. Access to ocean increased by 50%. Common border increased by 80%. Common language by 200%. Common regional trading bloc by 30%. Colony-colonizer relationship had the maximum impact in terms of the change in international trade, 900%. Common colonizer, 190%. Common policy and polity, 300%. Common currency, 340%. Colonial rule has had a great impact in increasing international trade. The trade between India and the United Kingdom has been of a high order, primarily because India was ruled by the British government for a couple of centuries. East India Company set foot in India and started controlling the economic activities in India. And that itself has caused a big impact on the international trade patterns of India. But the colony-colonizer relationship is not a sustainable relationship. The international trade had to be diversified. International trade had to be developed on the merits of the products and services. International trade had to be developed based on equitable considerations. So if this article talked about distances of different nature having differential influences on international trade, probably an appropriate framework was required to define exports in terms of basic principles which are applicable for the contemporary times. That is what Professor Pankaj Ghemawat's CAGE framework does for us. If you look at the top 10 regional trading blocks in the world, we know that there are certain trading blocks which were constituted essentially for trade, particularly NAFTA. Similarly, Union was established to promote one common block of currency as well as one common block of trade. BRICS was a very unique trading bloc. It is actually a cooperative conglomeration of different countries. BRICS comprised Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It was an example of a bloc that was developed to reflect not any singular principle of unity, because the countries are distanced, have different political affiliations, diverse cultures, and also different economic factors. However, this has arisen because BRICS leaders wanted to show that they have a say in the global economic order. In terms of having closeness and proximity, NAFTA has been the closest, including cultural closeness. However, NAFTA itself was driven by differences. The CAGE framework in that context comes up with an intellectual solution for a global strategy development. It said 4 distances are of prime importance in driving globalization: cultural distance, administrative or political distance, geographic distance, and economic distance. What are the cultural attributes that define the cultural distance? These are history, religion, language, work ethics, and a few other facets. The administrative and political distance factors are sharing an ideology or a colonial past, which boosts the trade. Government-driven economic and trade policies also influence, in a positive frame, export potential. Geographic distance obviously has some merit. The closer the countries, the greater the trade potential, simply because there is ease of exports when 2 countries share the border or they are very proximate. The quality of logistics can make or mar the distance though. Economic distance is another very important factor. The wealth of the nation and the people drive consumption, and the greater consumption naturally attracts exports to that country. The local supply and export-import economics influence the trade between 2 countries. We can look at the CAGE distance framework in terms of many other factors which support these distances. In this table, the 4 distances are listed, and attributes that characterize the distance, attributes that create the distances, industries that are impacted by the distance are discussed here. When you look at the attributes that create the distances, Cultural distance is established because of different languages, different ethnicities, religions, and social norms. And administrative distance increases when there are no colonial ties. If there is no shared monetary or political association, if political hostility exists between two countries and the government policies are divergent, and if there are institutional weaknesses, particularly administrative, judicial, and legal. That is, if a country is seen to be having poor judicial structures, companies will be reluctant to export to such jurisdictions. The geographic distance is influenced by the following attributes: physical remoteness, lack of common border, lack of sea or river access, size of country, weak transportation of communication links, difference in climates. And the economic distance is driven by the difference in consumer economics, consumer incomes, difference in costs and quality of natural resources, financial resources, human resources, infrastructure, intermediate inputs, and informational knowledge. But when these distances are there, they are not specific to any particular industry, but each industry is impacted by these distances in a different manner. So if you look at the industries or products that are affected by these four distances, cultural distance impacts products which have high linguistic content. Therefore, television streaming or the movie streaming or music streaming is impacted by linguistic content. That's why we find so many Hollywood movies now being offered in local regional languages in India, so that the companies can overcome the linguistic barrier or the cultural barrier. Products that affect cultural or national identity of consumers, particularly in respect of foods, they impacted by the cultural distance. Product features vary in terms of size. For example, an automobile that is required in India has to be larger than the automobile that is required in Japan. An automobile that is used in the United States is even larger because there is a cultural association of large cars in the United States of America and small cars in the country of Japan. The standards, that is electrical appliance standards or such other measurement standards, they impact the nature of the product. Packaging. Certain products carry country-specific quality associations such as tea, coffee, wines, fruits, etc. Government involvement is high in industries that are producers of staple goods, that is electricity, producers of other entitlements such as drugs, large employers, that is farming and other agricultural activities, large suppliers to the government, mass transportation, defense contracts, national champions, aerospace and automobiles, which are considered vital to national security, telecommunications and defense again, exploiters of natural resources, oil, mining, subject to high sunk cost infrastructure. These create administrative distance, or the administrative distance impacts these industries. The geographic distance is impacted by the following types of industries. Products that have a low value to weight bulk ratio, that is cement, it becomes unproductive to export cement over thousands of miles. Similarly, it becomes unproductive and uneconomic to export vials containing liquid injectables across miles of geographical distance. Therefore, products which have low value to weight or bulk ratio are not ideal to be internationalized. Geographic distance plays a part there. Products that are fragile or perishable, glass and fruits. Although we may have packaging and transportation practices which take care of these things, the economics are impacted by the additional packaging and additional care that is required to be taken to make sure that the geographic distance is not handicapping the internationalization. Geographic distance also gets impacted when communications and connectivity are extremely important in the industry. For example, financial services. Again, that has been overcome by the seamless connectivity that occurs all across the globe thanks to the telecommunication and connectivity platforms that are available now. Local supervision and operational requirements are high in respect of certain industries and certain products, particularly pharmaceutical products, agricultural products, wherever there is human safety involved. In such cases, geographic distance determines the nature of exports. And when we have high need for intense quality assurance, countries feel the need to be close to each other. Then we have economic distance. In respect of economic distance, the industries or products that are affected by the economic distance are products where the nature of demand varies with income level, automobiles, where economies of standardization or scale are important, example cell phones, labor and other factor cost differences are salient, example garments, where distribution or business systems are different, for example insurance, and where companies need to be responsive and agile, for example home appliances, where there is zero tolerance for idle time in households and therefore in customer bases. Extending this comparison further, we can also look at products which are more sensitive to distance and products which are less sensitive to distance. When you have products such as meat preparations, cereal preparations, edible products, tobacco products, we can say that these products are time sensitive, distance sensitive. That is one aspect. But more than that, the cultural aversion or attraction towards those products becomes a significant sensitivity factor in accepting those products culturally. Office machines and automatic data processing equipment, again, they are more sensitive to the linguistic ties. When you look at the administrative distance, especially in terms of preferential trading agreements, products such as gold, non-monetary instruments, electricity current, coffee, tea, cocoa, spices, textile fibers, sugar preparations, honey, these are all more sensitive to administrative distance. We know that there are ties between countries with reference to these products. India and Malaysia had certain ties with reference to palm oils, and those have to be restructured in recent times, and that has led to some kind of imbalance in the import-export position between the countries. Similarly, we have got several preferential trading agreements which govern several commodities, be it the agriculture products that are listed here or even crude oil. So it is important to see how administrative distance and the preferential trading agreements impact certain products. Physical remoteness again impacts electricity current, natural gas as well as manufactured gas, paperboard, live animals, sugar preparations, and honey. The economic distance impacts, especially economic distance decreases trade. In the case of non-ferrous metals, manufactured fertilizers, meat and meat preparations, iron and steel, pulp and waste paper. We can see how economic performance of China as a nation impacts the steel prices. Steel commodity cycle is driven by demand in various global markets. Therefore, those products are very sensitive to economic factors which play out in different countries. Some products are less sensitive. The cultural distance, for example, doesn't impact much road vehicles, cord and wood, metalworking machinery, electricity current. The administrative distance doesn't impact much gas, natural and manufactured travel goods, handbags, footwear, sanitary plumbing, heating and lighting fixtures, furniture and furniture parts. Physical remoteness doesn't affect much pulp and waste paper, photographic apparatuses, telecommunications, sound recording apparatuses, coffee, tea, cocoa, spices, gold and non-monetary. Economic distance doesn't affect much coffee, tea, cocoa, spices, animal oils and fats, office machines, power generating machinery, photographic apparatus, etc. You would have noticed that certain products figure in more than one vertical column. That's because the ranking is different, and also because a product can be more sensitive to more than one distance. Similarly, a product could be less sensitive to more than one distance. These results, however, confirm the importance of distinguishing between the various components of distance in assessing foreign market opportunities. Electricity, for example, is highly sensitive to administrative and geographic factors, but not at all to cultural factors because it is an essential item. So industry sensitivity to distances of the four types has to be understood before a proper global strategy is established. Let us look at India's top exporting and importing countries. We have 2019-20 figures in USD billion here. F denotes favorable, UF denotes unfavorable. If you see the trading partners for India, in terms of the highest exports, we have USA, followed by UAE, then China, then Hong Kong, and Saudi Arabia next. There are not many countries which are of the same scale of exports as USA, China, and Hong Kong for us. In fact, Hong Kong and China could be clubbed together and it could be very high level of exports. In terms of imports, again, we import a lot from China and followed closely by USA, Hong Kong, Germany, Switzerland, and other developed countries such as South Korea. So the trade balance between India and USA is 23.4 in favor of India, whereas the trade balance in respect of China is adverse with 48.65 as the adverse trade balance. So it is important for us to look at how these distances are working out in respect of each of these export countries and importing countries. If you look at CD, it is favorable in respect of USA. AD is favorable in respect of USA, but geographic distance is unfavorable, economic distance is favorable. What are the dominant drivers? Technology and economy. In respect of China, both cultural and administrative distance are unfavorable, but the geographic distance is favorable, so is economic distance. Technology and economy drive the trade status. In respect of the Gulf countries, UAE, cultural distance is unfavorable, but the others are favorable. In respect of a country such as Switzerland, the cultural distance is favorable, administrative distance is favorable, geographic distance may not exactly be favorable or unfavorable because it's a European country, but it is close enough. And the economic distance is favorable. And what drives the trade? It is finance, not necessarily technology. In respect of South Korea, cultural distance is unfavorable, but all the others are favorable. Technology and economy drive the trade with South Korea. So is it with Malaysia. So we can analyze different countries in respect of their export-import relationships with other country and assess that relationship in terms of the four distances that we have highlighted, and also understand the dominant drivers that influence that level of trade and the distances. Cage factors may not therefore have equal weightage, and there could be many other factors influencing trade, for example, technology. And technology generally influences the economic aspects of trade. When you look at the top exported products from India and the top imported products from India, we will see that petro products, intriguingly, are one of the highest to the total. It's a commodity. Pharmaceuticals is also very high to the total, 6% is tech-based. Diamonds, where we have natural advantage in terms of creating designs and manufacturing diamond products, we are high, 5.52%. Agricultural exports is 2.89%. When we look at this, you will find that commodity-based products are exported more from India rather than tech-based products. The only tech-based product which is pretty high in terms of percentage to total is pharmaceuticals. The other tech-based products such as automobiles, auto parts are fairly low in terms of top exportation. In terms of top importation, as we all know, petroleum is the largest single import item. This is followed by gold. 17.5% for petroleum and 5.95% for gold. Then diamonds, 4.32%. What we can see is that India imports several commodities at a fairly high levels of intensity with reference to the total imports. There are tech-based imports as well: integrated circuits, electronics, computers, telecom gear, phones, petrol, oil, etc. So in terms of the imports, there is a fair bit of mix between tech-based products and commodity-based products, whereas exported products are more in terms of commodity nature. So if we need to change India's export and import mix, we need to have the distance factors carefully taken into account, and also we need to have technology-driven policy and factor conditions. If we are successful in having semiconductor manufacturing in India in a big way, probably some of these imports may go away and they may be replaced by exports of those chips and chip related products outside India. So this is the kind of analysis which countries and companies have to do to ensure that the globalization is on the right lines and is productive and helpful to wealth creation in the nation. So let's look at technological distance, also a factor. That's because cage framework, in my opinion, is not sufficiently representative of technological distance that could influence production and consumption of goods and services globally. I therefore feel that we also need to define the concept of technological distance. There are two aspects to technology. One is the production aspect, the second is the consumption aspect. Technology is the bridge that makes products and provides to the consumption markets. Consumption markets have their own preferences in terms of products and services, which translates into technological requirements. The technological capabilities are the foundations for the production base to turn out the kind of products which consumption markets may require. So in terms of production factors of technology, we need high technology in development and manufacture. We must have the ability to innovate and differentiate on products and services. We should have cost leadership in products and services across the value chain. In terms of consumption markets, the market show a preference for premium differentiated products. There must be willingness to explore new products and services, and there must be a value-based life cycle cost approach. Technology is the enabler of both production and consumption in that light. If you assess India in respect of the technological distance, the following instances of products come to mind. 1. Pharmaceuticals. 2. Steel. 3. Information technology. 4. Automobiles. 5. Chemicals, to quote a few. The greater the number of products which are supported by technological distance, the greater is the impact of India in the global economic order. And technological distance also has to be futuristically assessed. It should not be extrapolated based on current status. Many of the laggards of the previous decades are now leaders. Similarly, the current laggards could be future leaders for trade. Let's look at how things have evolved from the past situation to the current situation. In the past, data processing, land telephones, dated passenger cars, oral bulk drugs, imported oils, imported auto parts, imported food grains, 2G networks, cloth, clocks, these were the ones which were part of the export agenda and import agenda. But today, information technology, mobile telephones, modern passenger cars, sterile dosage forms, world-scale oil refining, exported auto parts, exported food grains, 4G and even 5G networks, apparel and watches, that is value-added textiles, are the ones which are more prominent in terms of the globalization. When you look at the future state from the current state, we already have information technology, IC engine automobiles, chemical medicines, computers, apparel, trains, fossil energy, PLCs, watches as potential export items which have proved their worth in the global markets. But in future, we should be able to don the mantle of digitally driven economy, artificial intelligence, electric automobiles, biology, medicines, chips, fashion, bullet trains, renewable energy, sensors, smartwatches could drive globalization from India. Cage framework does interpret technology in terms of economy, but it is also appropriate to view technology as a distinct driver of distance between countries. Technology has the greatest potency to promote positive trade between countries. Professor Ghemawat also has proposed a supplemental framework which is Adaptation, Aggregation and Arbitrage framework. Global strategy typically focuses on technology and scale on one hand and global local balance on the other. The scale and technology factors are less problematic than balancing global and local conditions. The AAA framework was proposed by Professor Pankaj in 2007 to meet the central challenge of global strategy, that is, managing the differences across borders and entities. The three strategies of AAA represent three distinct types of global strategy. The first A is adaptation. We need to boost revenues and market share by maximizing a firm's local relevance. That's why information technology companies from India, when they set foot in the foreign shores, try to set up development centers, recruit local people, even as deputing from India is necessary. They also try to recruit people from the local communities. This is adaptation. And adaptation is being done by foreign companies when they come to India and try to meet our consumption markets, or when they set up manufacturing facilities in India. The second one is aggregation. That is, you deliver economies of scale by creating regional or even global standardized operations. The entire APAC is seen as one region by most multinational companies, and they aggregate the skills, the production capacities, developmental capabilities that exist in contiguously placed, equally skilled countries. Similarly, the developed world of North America gets aggregated as one. Entire European Union has got aggregated as one, and so on. The third is adaptation. That is, benefit from regional national differences by locating different parts of the value chain in different location, because each country may have certain unique competence in developing one type of product or in providing one type of resource. You try to adapt your manufacturing network, your development network, or even your marketing network to such regional and national specialties. Most transnational enterprises will use each of the above three in some measure or the other, but typically firms tend to have a dominant feature amongst the three depending on the context that envelops the firm as the environment. These three strategies will require three different types of organizations to deliver on the chosen strategy. If you want to adapt, you require a country-centered organization. You need to focus on local needs and local talent. That's why the way subsidiaries are structured is a hot topic in multinational and transnational companies. Trying to impose the foreign headquarters views on the local subsidiary have only resulted in suboptimization of local capabilities. That is done even by Indian companies when they try to work in the developed world or other emerging markets. It is important for countries and companies to recognize that the full benefit of globalization occurs only when the local conditions are integrated with the network of the company. So this is adaptation. Hindustan Unilever is a great example of how the company as a global multinational could adapt to different cultures. Today, Hindustan Unilever is seen more as an Indian company than as a Unilever subsidiary or as a multinational. That is the extent to which Hindustan Unilever could merge seamlessly with the national fabric of India. Aggregation, that is creation of global units, creation of product divisions, is a very important organizational step for aggregation that enables regional clustering, especially in sales. IBM is a great example of how geographically the operations can be structured and how competencies and competitiveness can be developed out of such global business units and product divisions. Many information technology companies have established appropriate units in India to be able to aggregate the skill levels that are available in India with their system analysis and other capabilities. Several clinical research organizations that are global have aggregated capabilities of countries such as Philippines and countries such as India into one global clinical platform. Arbitrage, that is vertically specialized firm which is functionally driven but also functionally specialized, which is constantly looking out for arbitrage. That is also an important aspect. And this arbitrage occurs in sourcing, warehousing, manufacturing, distribution, and health. Most transnational enterprises will use each of the above three in some measure or the other, but typically firms tend to have a dominant feature amongst the three, depending on the firm environment context again. So what are the globalization options? When managers first hear about broad strategies of adaptation, aggregation, and arbitrage that make up the AAA triad, the most common response is that let's do all the three. But it is not that simple. A close look at these three strategies reveals differences as well as tensions among them. Business leaders must therefore figure out which elements will meet the company needs better and prioritize accordingly. So first factor is competitive advantage. Are we going to gain competitive advantage by globalizing at all? Is it necessary for Indian Railways to globalize itself? We may have the ability to set up railway networks in several countries, but is it going to give competitive advantage to Indian Railways as a nation? The answer is no. Therefore, we have to fundamentally look at the need for competitive advantage as arising from globalization. But when we want competitive advantage, gives certain advantages, aggregation gives some, and arbitrage give totally different context to competitive advantage. In case of adaptation, local relevance is achieved through national focus, while economies of scale are exploited to some extent. In aggregation, we tend to get scale and scope economies through international standardization, whereas in arbitrage, we get absolute economies through international specialization. The second factor is where should we locate our operations. In adaptation and aggregation, mainly in foreign countries that are similar to the home base, so that the effects of cage are minimized. Whereas in the case of arbitrage, we are willing to locate ourselves in a more diverse set of countries because we want to actually exploit the elements of distance. And how do we coordinate? How should we connect international operations? In case of adaptation, by country with emphasis on achieving local presence within the borders. In the case of aggregation, we do coordination either by business structure or regional structure or customer grouping. And there's a lot of emphasis on horizontal relationships for cross-border economies of scale. There's no point in moving everything from one regional cluster all the way to the headquarters and again bringing back to the second regional cluster. The economics and also coordination works much better with horizontal cooperation between these two clusters. In respect of arbitrage, it is by function, with emphasis on vertical relationships even across organizational boundaries. You can see the differences between these three types of AAA strategies and the factors and controls. In respect of adaptation, we look at excessive variety or complexity. In respect of aggregation, it leads to excessive standardization with importance on scale. And in respect of arbitrage, it is the narrowing of spreads that takes place. What blocks change in respect of each of the three? In adaptation, entrenched country chiefs tend to block change. In respect of aggregation, all powerful unit, regional or account heads block change. And in arbitrage, heads of key functions block change. Therefore, as part of implementing AAA framework, we should also understand how the organization needs to be managed, how the leadership dynamics need to be managed. Corporate diplomacy is one of relating the company to the local environment and the local governments. They should be seen as good corporate citizens. In adaptation, we have to address the issues of concern but proceed with discretion, given the emphasis on cultivating local presence. In respect of aggregation, we should avoid the appearance of homogenization or hegemonism, especially for US companies, and be sensitive to any backlash. In respect of arbitrage, we should address the exploitation or displacement of suppliers, channels, or intermediates, which are potentially more prone to political disruption. What should be the type of corporate strategy in each of these three verticals? In respect of adaptation, scope is a key driver. Variation is a key driver. Decentralization is one aspect of strategy. Partitioning of product lines, manufacturing lines, marketing lines, modularization, flexibility, partnerships, recombination, innovation. These are the drivers of corporate strategy. Whereas in respect of aggregation, it is regional country groupings, product or business groupings, functions, platforms, competencies, client industry nature. These are the drivers. Arbitrage is driven by cultural effects, administrative effects, geographic effects, economic effects. So the corporate strategy itself varies depending upon your strategy of globalization, whether it is of adaptation, aggregation, or arbitrage variety. The AAA Triangle is a kind of strategy map for managers. The percentage of sales that is spent on advertising indicates the importance of adaptation for the company. That is, the more you advertise as a proportion to sales in a country, that means that you are adapting yourself fairly well. That's why you see a multinational such as Hindustan Unilever undertaking huge amount of advertising in local markets. The famous Lux advertisements or the Dove advertisements that are being adapted to the Indian situation. These are examples of how a multinational tries to adapt itself to the local fabric. In respect of aggregation, the percentage of R&D expenditure to sales, that is a good indicator of the aggregation capability. And in the case of arbitrage, the labor to sales percentage is a good indicator of arbitrage. When we look at products and companies situated in this, with zero as the central point, you can find a scale how a company is moving on the scale of adaptation, aggregation, and arbitrage. You can draw a spider diagram based on this. The median and top decile scores are based on US manufacturing data from CompuStat's Global Vantage database and US Census Bureau. The ratios of advertising and R&D to sales rarely exceed 10%, more so for developing countries. Managers should pay attention to any scores above the median because most likely those are the areas that merit strategic focus. Scores above the 90th percentile may be precious to ignore. Should we go global to local or local to global? Companies can move from strong local development or manufacturing arbitrage and go global for markets. In rarer cases, companies move from strong global market presence to local delivery or manufacturing arbitrage. Companies such as Infosys established strong local development competencies in India and executed a global development model based on these competencies. So local software development and arbitrage from India and aggregation of markets globally was the bedrock of its global delivery solutions model. On the other hand, Cognizant started with the US market access and sought India software development as the arbitrage. So from US to India was Cognizant, whereas Infosys was from India to global. Apotex is a global generic player from Canada. It started with technological and market know-how that is based on the North Americas and leveraged India for development and manufacturing arbitrage. On the other hand, Orchid Pharma, a homegrown Indian first-generation enterprise, started with Indian development and manufacturing capability and aggregated its global markets. Therefore, how you start, that is from global foothold and expand to local spread, or start with a local foothold and go global, is a matter of strategy and the leadership capabilities that are driving a company's strategy. Generally, when companies evolve, they use any two of the three A's: adaptation, aggregation, and arbitration. Any two of these three to evolve the most effective combination suited for the respective needs. Cognizant's AA strategy can be seen in this aspect. They staffed with relatively stringent recruiting process. They took more MBAs and consultants, more non-Indians, and more training programs in India. In terms of delivery, they always had two global leads, one in the US and one in India for each project. All proposals are done jointly between India and US. More proximity was maintained with US customers. On-site kickoff teams were an essential part of project development. Intensive travel, use of technology were the highlights of Cognizant's AA strategy as far as delivery was concerned. Marketing was as part of joint India-US positioning. Use of US nationals in key market positioning was a key attribute of Cognizant's local presence. very senior relationship managers, and there was focus on selling to a small number of large customers. That is how Cognizant achieved its AAA strategy. The combinations could be many. It could be adaptation and aggregation, it could be aggregation and arbitrage, and it could be arbitrage and adaptation. If you want to do adaptation and aggregation as a combination, the strategy is one of developing India as a focus for sales and marketing and serve all SAARC and SC markets from India. If you want to do aggregation and arbitrage as the strategy, you cover all regional markets such as North America, EU, Russia, CIS, APAC, ME, etc. with specific targets for each of these clusters, and then develop appropriate countries regionally or globally to serve appropriately. If you are looking at arbitrage and adaptation, develop India as a hub for development and manufacturing, because the arbitrage capability exists in these areas for India. Skill levels are high and capability for frugal engineering and rapid development are very high in India. And then use India to serve all aggregated emerging markets and or selectively aggregated developed markets. Most transnational enterprises will use each of the above three in some measure or the other, but typically firms tend to have a dominant feature among the three depending on the firm environment context. In respect of diagnostic imaging, we can do a competitive map in AAA framework. Philips Medical Systems, GE Healthcare, and Siemens Medical Solutions are compared here. In respect of the three colors, you see blue as the Philips, indigo as GE, and yellow or brownish yellow as Siemens. You will see that GE Healthcare came out superior in this AAA map because of A, economies of scale, B, economies of scope, acquisition capabilities, and taking advantage of competitors' weaknesses. So by drawing the competitive map, each player in the industry can understand where it stands and take appropriate strategic actions to correct the AAA strategy or to focus on any two of the three depending upon the company's strengths and targets. Looking at this, we can think of a trifecta which would move from elusiveness to inclusiveness. If you are internally focused and if you are not looking at globalization, the country will be cocooned, it will be outside the global economic order. On the other hand, if the country accepts the winds of change from other countries and also influences the winds of change in other countries, it would be an inclusive globalization. Given that there are serious constraints on the ability of an organization to use all the three A's simultaneously with great effectiveness, companies should practice some level of strategic optimization based on certain principles. Focus on one or two of the AAs first and develop the broad strategic impact. Link the chosen ones with appropriate organizational structure. Employ multiple integration mechanisms across the value chain. Choose optimal integration, attempt externalization of integration so that the global network is also part of your inclusive development of the AAA factors. That way, adaptation, aggregation, and arbitrage could work together very effectively in any chosen combination depending on the nature of the supply source and nature of the receiving source. So with this we come to the end of global strategy presentation, which covered two important aspects: the cage network, the theory of distances, and AAA, both proposed by Professor Pankaj Ghemawat. We will meet again in the next session. Thank you.